Hello and welcome to another episode of the Express Economist. And this week we'll be talking about India's population growth. I have with me Professor K.S. James. He's Director and Senior Professor at the International Institute for Population Sciences. Thank you, Professor James. As many of you know, the global population has hit 8 billion mark on November 15th. That's according to United Nations World Population Projections. And India is set to overtake China next year as the most populous country on the planet. And this week we'll be talking to Professor James about, whether a big population for India is necessarily a bane or a boon. A lot of people talk about demographic dividend. Many others talk about a demographic bomb. So we'll try to understand what have the population projections said about India's population. Especially important because we've not had a census that was supposed to happen in 2021. And what are the policy implications for it, and how can, if it is a bother, then how can it be turned into an improvement or an advantage for India? So let's kick off the discussion by first asking, considering that every years we have a census, and we've not had a census in 2021. Where is the United Nations getting these numbers from? How is it sort of coming up with these projections? Because it's saying that India will overtake China, and we will peak at around 1.7 billion people in 2065, I think. So where are all these numbers coming from? How are they deciding?
Thank you, Udit. Thank you for being me in this show. And this population projection is always based on certain assumptions. Any projection that way is based on certain assumptions. And fortunately, the assumption which is made in demography is possible, and it always follows a pattern compared to the economic projection or other types of projection. Because it's possible for us to project the birth rate. Because population is always like an identity. Identity means, any place, if population has to increase, it should be birth, it should be deaths, and plus migration. These are the only three factors. That is, we call it a population identity.
Birth, death, and migration, you said.
Migration. There are no other forces which can come. So we can really understand how birth is going to go in the future. We can also try to project life expectancy, that is the death part. The other reverse of the death part is the life expectancy, how it will be growing. And also we will know migration. Migration is the difficult part of the one to project. But, for a country like India, you can say overall migration is insignificant because it's a huge country. Immigration only matters. Migration with internal migration doesn't matter for countries. So naturally, we will have certain assumptions. So that way, it is possible even if you don't have a census, because you have the information of the birth rate, death rate, as well as the migration. So if it is possible for you to really understand what will be the future trajectory of our population growth. Okay. That's what UN is doing based on 2011 census. And from then, they will try to see how it will follow up.
Okay. But, because there are apparently some differences between what, census projections might be and what the UN has projected. Where might those discrepancies coming from? Is it because population might have slowed more or less? How are these projections in any way different? Is the census projection the same as the UN projection?
No, it's not really. The census, if you really look at census projection, at this time, 2022 census is giving something around 137 crores. That when population projection was something around 141 crores in 2022. These differences comes because of two reasons. One is after census, we have also something called a post-enumeration. Indian census, whatever we call, it is one of the best in the world. So in terms of its count, in terms of its quality, etc. But after census, we also conduct a post-enumeration census check. And you also understand what would be the proportion of under-enumeration or underestimation during the census time, under-enumeration, which we say. So it is always found that it is within the permissible range, something around less than 2% in India, around that. So that way it is fine. But we don't make any adjustment because once census gives you 2001 or 2011 March 1st is the population, that is the end of it. We will not change that population. But UN makes some adjustment. UN believes that there will be some under enumeration of population in census. And we have also the birth rate and death rate comes from the SRS sample registration system for us, which is every year, which is published by the Registrar General of India, which also even make a slight adjustment. So they don't think that SRS may be exactly correct. They may think that there can be a possibility of certain underestimation. So they slightly adjust. That is why UN projection is slightly higher than the Indian projection, but it is not very far off. 137 and 142, it is not very, very different, but it is slightly different.
So the next question is related to what you said. You mentioned about the Indian census being one of the standout events. We failed to do that in 2021. But even in 2022, we have not been able to start it. So is there any understanding you can provide us, why haven't we done that till now?
I'm not able to precisely tell you why it is not being done, but I can understand the delay because, the COVID time, it is 2020 and 21 was COVID times. Because the enormity of the operations in India is census operation, because it takes several years really to plan for a census. A break in that period will also affect, it will delay it further because, you have a 1 year before the census, we have a housing census, which is called, because complete house listing. That is, if 2021 was supposed to be the census, you should have even just 1 year before, you should have carried out a complete housing census, and which also gives you data on household population, number of houses, and all those things. So which is not carried out. And prior to that, we have something of a mapping of the areas, which is being done. So this is actually several years of work which culminates into a census, which is because it is all derailed. I think it really takes time to take off. But I hope it will happen because the government is also committed. I understand it is for conducting census. I hope it will happen soon.
So, just, almost as a student, I would like to understand, what is the salience of doing a census at a particular time? Like we do it once every 10 years. If we were to do it at different time horizons, one time in 7 years, another time in 15 years, or if we suppose we are missing out with every passing year and do it in, say, 13 years this time, how does that impact, why does it matter? What is the salience of doing it at a regular interval?
Because census data, census is a huge operation. Actually, you cannot hide it out every year, or it is not possible. So that's why most of the countries do it. Some countries do it 5 years, but many countries do it once in 10 years. That is so the India from 1881 onwards, consistently, we were doing it for every 10 years. It was never missed, with although there were serious problems in between, which was never missed. So we reached 2021, where it is the first time we are missing the census. Because census data is so vital. Census data, although if you really ask for understanding about at the all India level, census may not be that important because we have good information at the all India level. But if you want to go at a disaggregated geographical region, we have no sources of information other than census, the reliable sources of information. That is why census become very critical for many, many other aspects. Because if you really want to know, for instance, how many children are there in a village who will be in the age group, a particular age group which has to go to a primary school, we need to depend on census. If you really want to know how many women will be there in a particular area or sub-districts, which we may have to go for the delivery care. All those, many of these data at the disaggregated level or district or sub-district level, which comes from census. That's why census is hugely important. So delay means your estimation of all these parameters can be slightly more likely to be wrong, or likely to be deviant from the actual. We don't know how far it will be deviant, because still we will be using the projected one. So how far it will be deviant, we will not be knowing unless we have a census. That's the huge importance of census in India.
I mean, can you give me another example, just explaining how one particular data not being available or working on projections and working on actual data, how does that impact in real life, maybe in a policy example or any example of that nature?
Yeah, I'm saying the classic example is that if I want to know in a district or sub-district level, how many people will be seeking job.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because NSSO gives you only up to the state level. We don't have at the district or sub-district level. Where will we get this data? We get the data only from census, because once you have census, you know how many people are educated there in that sub-district, how many people will be in the employability age, and how many of them are working, not working. All those information comes from. So decentralized planning, census become almost vital, you can say. It's a critical element. So what we have to do now, all these things we cannot do because we don't have birth rate and death rate. We cannot project these things, the workers' plan. So we will just have a linear projection, or we can have a sophisticated non-linear projection. All these things are possible, but still it may have its own margin of error. So naturally, we don't know what is that error. It can be close. We don't know. But
True.
If you want to know whether it is correct or not, we need a census. That is the importance of that.
Now, let me come to the UN's population projections and ask you to sort of reflect on what were the key takeaways for you about India. What were the 2, 3, 4 things that you thought were of most vital significance that the projections were showing?
No, even not only gives you the projection population, it also gives you the fertility rate, the mortality rate, life expectancy, and there are so many indicators UN gives you for the next up to 2100. So it's actually a long-term projection. So long-term projections are always suspicious because we don't know about very long-term, that in the long run all of us are dead. Yeah, that is a famous quotation. So naturally, but it gives you some indication. It gives you, but these indications are already available with us, sense that we are in a replacement level fertility now. That replacement level means 2 parents are replacing 2 children. So that way, I'm saying in the long run population growth will be 0, and the life expectancy is increasing, and it is likely to increase quite fast. If you know that, if you look at UN, the life expectancy is going to go up, and the working age population growth and all those things are really shown by UN. So it's not unexpected. We know even the Indian population projection by the official population projection also gives you the same trend. So that way, I would say that a positive demography is something which is shown by the UN population projection as well as by the Indian population projection based on 2011 census, which is available up to 2036.
Okay. So, there is this question about demographic dividend, about India having a demographic dividend. And I was sort of reading some of the pieces comparing India with China, and which showed that, in 1950, India and China had fairly similar growth rates, but China was much higher than us. And then around 70s, 80s, China started, their population started slowing down, and today, I mean, now, and that is the result now that India would be overtaking them. And it's also said that, India is going through that bulge in the demographic profile, where I think the working age is really a substantive part of it. Can you explain what is essentially demographic dividend to our viewers, and whether we are past that stage? Are we in the middle of it, or is it going to continue for long? What exactly is that?
Yeah. Actually, it needs a bit of time to explain it, because I think many times demographic dividend concept, I think that it is misunderstood. Some people think that demographic dividend is like a population boom in the working ages. Yes, it's a population boom in the working age, but it is not a population growth as such. Demographic dividend happens because of the change in the demographic transitions. Because of the demographic transition. It means that when there is a fertility transition, only demographic dividend happens. Okay, so it is not the population growth will not give you a demographic dividend. It is the transition which gives you a demographic dividend. That means that your proportion of people in the younger ages declines. It means in India, if you look at now, 0 to 15 population is sort of a negative growth. It is not growing at all. It is actually declining. Every year, number of people in 0 to 15 or 0 to 14 is declining. Because 15 to 59 is 59 is will be increasing now because it is primarily because the past fertility. In the past, we had higher birth rates, so naturally that will continues to grow. So what is primarily demographic dividend? Demographic dividend, if it is because of the demographic transition, you would say that I will say it is because of 2 or 3 reasons. The first reason, the important reasons, which actually many times we miss, is that demographic dividend comes primarily because of the women's work participation. So who gives the dividend? The dividend is given always by the women, because the women who were spending earlier, because of the high fertility situation, they were spending all their time for the childbearing and child rearing. Now can really come to labor market. She has adequate time in their working ages to come to the labor market. So the first question is, are we employing our women productivity? That is the first thing. And secondly, the demographic dividend happens, any small families. When you have, advantage is that, earlier, higher families, your parents, 2 parents would have been taking care of 2, the older people as well as the younger 4 or 5 younger people. Now, it is within the family, you are spending much less on the non-productive adult, the population. So that is another demographic dividend.
The old age dependency would be.
Because old age dependency, what happens, we expect that if that's the case, the savings within the household will be higher. The saving rate within a household can go up because earlier you had to take care of many people. Now you are taking care of much less people within a household. Naturally, your saving rate will go up. Once household saving is anyway, it will positively affect a demographic dividend or country's growth. So these are the 2 or 3 ways in which we can really achieve demographic dividend. So the first one is the women's work participation, because that's the most important thing. But what happens? The nature of the fertility transition in India itself was not favorable for a very high women's participation. Why it is so? Why it is so? Because usually in any countries of the world, whether it is Western countries or the Southeast Asian countries, the demographic transition or fertility transition happened when there is a improvement in standard of living, when there is an educational advancement. So after that, people thought, okay, it is better to have a smaller family. But India did not wait for that. India policymakers thought, no, that is too much for us to wait. We cannot actually make everyone literate and then wait for demographic changes. So we wanted to achieve it faster. So what we did, we intervened in the sense that our policies were to target the illiterate, poor, to adopt a small family now. So we were successful in that. And we have to give credit to that because, anyway, higher population growth is not that advantageous, because too much population growth is also not advantageous, because 2% growth rate per annum, which we experience in 70s, 80s, and 90s, it's desirable. So naturally, we were, but those women are in the working age population now. So those women who adopted small family, but they were illiterate, unskilled, poor, they came into the working ages. So it is possibility of them getting employed very productively is also perhaps is relatively less. So all this combination is really playing in the demographic dividend scenario in India. So that way, if you really ask me a question whether India has a demographic dividend, I will say yes, because a demographic transition is better than not having a demographic transition. And small family norm adopted by poor, illiterate, etc. is always better than not adopting it. That way it is better. But are we achieving its full potential? Perhaps no, because if you look at our female work participation is still very low. Our productivity levels are relatively low. All those things are constraints we may have to live with. So this is a big story.
Right. Right. So, I mean, if I understand, and just to recap for our viewers, and please correct me if I'm recapping it incorrectly, that it's not just that you have a bulge in your working age that you would necessarily, by definition, have a demographic dividend. it will really matter on what your population actually does, and in particular what the women do, whether they are employed and they are doing well in their jobs, and what happens to household savings. That's the sum and substance of what you're saying.
Absolutely. You put it in a very nicely in a few words.
So now the crucial thing then to understand, and we've done, viewers would know that we've done many episodes on the state of employment or women's labor force participation rate, and many of those things have very worrying levels. Women's labor force participation rate in India is one of the lowest in the world, alarmingly low, and that has not really moved up with fast economic growth as many might have expected. And we have in general a broader problem of unemployment and growth happening without creating as many jobs. Now, what I want to understand from you is that, given what you see in terms of data, and ballpark numbers are, as you said, are roughly the same, from the policy perspective, what are the 2 3 key takeaways that you have, or what would you suggest India should do going forward? Because one another thing that we got to know when we're reading about India is that India's population growth is sort of baked in for the time being. For the next 2 3 decades, we'll continue to grow, not because there's anything wrong with our policy today, but because already there is a momentum, and those people will have their children, and that will sort of keep driving our population growth. So then what is it that we can do to sort of really get a benefit out of the whole population? Otherwise we can continue and become old without necessarily becoming rich.
Yeah, my own sense is that the female work participation in the coming decades will go up. That is what I feel. There is no other way, because women are getting educated now, and they will come to the labor market, they will compete, and if you really look at the latest data, we also see a smaller trend. It is still one of the lowest, as you have mentioned, but still it's a positive trend is being shown. So which I hope it will continue in the future. But what we need to do for this, actually, that's what I was telling, because if you look at in the past data as well as the present data, the work participation among men is almost sort of universal. It is not very, very low. So it is quite relatively high, because there's no other option for them, perhaps.
60%, I think.
Yeah. So it is basically the women's work participation we need to emphasize. So women's work participation increase also depending on several other changes which is happening in the labor market, which happens in the society, because we need that acceptability, and all those things really matters, and the flexible timings. And perhaps COVID also given that flexibility, working from home and not going to the workplace every day. These are all really a boon for women's work participation, because women in India being also taking much of the burden within the household for the childbearing as well as other aspects. I think it's very, very important to have the flexibility inbuilt in the labor market. But what happened is that India did not have that flexibility earlier, because many Western countries or other countries adopted those kinds of flexibility, but we did not have that. I think these are all perhaps, whether it is at the policy level or at the societal level, it needs to have these kinds of flexibility should be inbuilt in our system, really to enhance the women's work participation, which will really enhance the demographic dividend. That is where the dividend really falls. And because, having their time available with them, but not able to, and ready to work, but not able to find a work is not good for, because they would have been productively used. So we need to really facilitate that kind of a work participation for the country.
Okay. So thanks a lot, Professor James, for that very succinct and illuminating discussion on India's population and the notion of demographic dividend and what we need to do. And I hope viewers would again sort of go back and perhaps watch some of the episodes that we've done on female labor force participation rate and why that is a massive worry. And it's coming back to the point that Professor James is talking about, that if India has to enjoy a demographic dividend, we need to get provide enough opportunities for women in India to work and participate in the economy. And that is where the real boost will come from. All the notions of our becoming a developed country and increasing our GDP and all of that will happen only when women in India are able to work in every possible manner. Thanks a lot, Professor James, for sparing your time. And for all the viewers, if you like the episode, please press like and subscribe to the channel. And we'll be back next week. Thank you.